2021, Sochi. There's a handful of laps to go, and rain is starting to hit the circuit. The Titanic Championship battle that year between Sir Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen would normally take precedence here, but instead, that lay with the leader of the race, the McLaren of Lando Norris. He had just taken his maiden pole position earlier that morning, and now was leading the race, en route to his first ever win in Formula 1. After the disappointment of watching the Honey Badger and the other McLaren run away to victory just a couple of rounds ago in Italy, this was a way to strike back at the critics that he had to put himself on the winner's rostrum to become a made man in Formula 1. But he was going to have to do it the hard way, because Hamilton was ranging up behind him, the Grand Master of the grid. In a faster car too, pressure don't get much higher than that, but he was holding his own, at least for now. By lap 49, the weather had become completely unpredictable. Even those on the pit wall weren't 100% sure of what was going on. Those on track, however, wanted to stay out. There was a 50-second gap back to third place driver, Sergio Perez. The fight for the win, therefore, was between Lando and Lewis. As they came around to begin lap 50, Lewis was ushered into the pits by his team. Despite his adamant proclamation that rain had become extinct in Russia, Mercedes were adamant themselves that more rain was on the way. Lando, meanwhile, stayed out, a call that he made, not wanting to make the switch to intermediates. By now, however, you could tell by the tone in his voice, the pressure of being close to victory was getting to him. By the time Lewis emerged from the pits on intermediate tires, he was 25 seconds behind Lando with 3 laps to go. 1 lap later, however, it was down to 4. The rain had arrived, and Lando was cooked. After crawling back to the pits for a fresh set of intermediates, he eventually squirmed his way home to finish in 7th place, and was also handed a reprimand for failing to acknowledge the existence of white lines in the pit lane entry. In no uncertain terms, this was an unmitigated disaster. I mean, yeah, sure, you could argue that you win some, you lose some, we're just all used to that in racing. But this was bad, and a sort of side effect that it had was that it helped fuel the narrative that Lando was a complete bottle job. A myriad of near misses and mistakes before and after this day helped coin the nickname Lando No Wins. Quite imaginative name. A joke almost as lame as anything that appears on this channel, but it was hard to shake. Even though McLaren tried to take full responsibility for it, when Daniel Ricciardo and Oscar Piastri had won races at McLaren while Lando got nada, it didn't really make him look like $1,000,000. And if anything, it would be a day that would haunt him forever, especially if he were never to get that maiden Grand Prix win. He never stopped believing in his ability to win a race, but given the nature of Formula 1, where car performance is so influential and seats are never quite guaranteed, the question was never about whether he was worthy of a win, but whether that day would ever come at all. (2024) Miami. Ah, crap. Like, literally. A couple of weeks after I threw it into this video.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
Well, anyway, it's the 6th round of the 2024 Formula 1 season. We're a quarter of the way through the championship, and by this point, there is no hype around the series whatsoever. Adrian Newey has once again worked wonders with his pencil at Red Bull, and Max Verstappen was running away to an almost guaranteed win every time. Not knocking him, Max is an almost immeasurably, insanely brilliant driver, but we all want to see close racing for the win, and we haven't been getting much of it lately. Stefano Domenicali blew it all off by saying that bored fans were in the minority. I don't know, fam. I don't know about that one. This weekend felt like any other. Everyone was expecting Max to get pole position, walk the race, and leave the United States of freedom with yet another piece of silverware. Now was the time to sulk and heave hopium. And we were all out of hopium. For Lando, however, his ultimatum this weekend was the same as it had been for the last few years here at McLaren. Pray that the car decides to be quick here and just hold it together if it is. There were some updates for the car heading into this weekend. Exactly how good they were going to be was a bit of a mystery. And with this round involving a sprint and thus limited time, we weren't going to know what the true pace was right away. However, early on, there was something curious. In sprint qualifying, Lando, who was the only one of the 2 McLaren drivers with the car upgrades, was quickest in SQ1. He was quickest again in SQ2. Perhaps they had something cooking here, and they did. Momentarily, a scruffy start to the lap in SQ3 threw Lando down into 9th place for the sprint, and thus ruined his chances of getting anything meaningful in the race on Saturday. Not that he would get much of a chance. The tag team effort of Hamilton and the Lord of the Eyebrows pushed Sir Lancelot into the side of Lando and gave him an early walk back to the paddock, a walk that would end up costing him 50,000 euros for crossing a live racetrack. There is not enough salt in this world that can measure up to the burn on that wound. At this point, the Lando haters had even more ammo to use in their crusade against the guy, with the sight of him squirming around in the first sector of SQ3 as yet another grain of proof that this guy continues to bottle and that he would never ever get his maiden Grand Prix win, that he just kept on getting in his own way, and that it would likely never change. What was needed for Lando himself, apart from a $300 drink from a local bar, was a reset ahead of qualifying. Just a couple of hours later, he would out-qualify his teammate Oscar Piastri, yes, but he wasn't all that far ahead for an upgraded car that just 24 hours before showed so much promise. There was still Sunday to come, sure, but this just seemed like it was just going to be another one of those weekends, I guess. As the Stars and Stripes were waved, and God was told to bless America, the first of 300 races in the United States of Freedom for 2024 were about to get underway. There are a lot of factors that go into winning a race, but two very big ones are A, get a good start, and B, don't get Maldonado'd on the first lap. Luckily for Lando, he achieved one of them, but the trade-off was that his start was mid, he fell behind his teammate into 6th place, and then began to fade away as the laps drew on. At this point, it seemed that, if anything, Piastri was set to be the star of the show, with him hanging around in 2nd place and keeping the Ferraris at bay. The gap up the front of Verstappen was hovering at around 3 seconds. It didn't get much closer from there, but critically, it never got further beyond that either. Max didn't feel quite comfortable enough in the car that weekend. Still though, he was in a position that he knew far too well, as the inner workings of Ferrari mulled over a strategy so that they can then change their minds again. Charles Leclerc was brought in for a pit stop, while Carlos Sainz set off after Piastri. The Spaniard and #1 fan of himself started to lean on the McLaren in a bid to melt his tires and scythe on past, but it didn't happen. In fact, he began to lag behind, and by this time, something was developing behind them both. It turned out that Lando, straggling way behind the Red Bull of Perez, wasn't him being mid, but rather, it was primarily tyre management. Now with that Pirelli rubber having been conserved enough, now was the time to use it. With Checo now pitted as well, Lando began to charge forward and was putting in times that was over a second a lap faster than what he was when he was placed behind the Mexican Minister of Defense. The McLaren's pace on medium tyres was evident right from Friday, and now, here when it mattered, it was really showing. Sainz may have been catching Piastri a little bit, but Norris was catching him at the rate of half a second a lap. Up at the front, bored apparently with his domination, Verstappen misjudged the entry into the Mickey Mouse chicane, ran off, and claimed the life of an innocent bystanding bollard. This gave slight damage to the floor of the car, but also, the errant bollard that lay on the track was enough to bring out a virtual safety car. But amazingly, this didn't really seem to benefit anybody, at least not in any detrimental way, to the lead of the race. And after the track was cleared, the field went racing again. But now with Verstappen behind Lando, after Red Bull brought him in for his pit stop shortly after the VSC ended. On lap 28, Sainz and Piastri came in for their pit stops, giving the lead to Norris and surrendering position to Leclerc. Although they probably should have waited for just a few more moments, because Kevin Magnussen, Denmark's answer to the Tsar Bomber, had continued his reign of tyranny and destruction that weekend by plowing into the side of Logan Sargent and leaving the Williams team with a negative count of chassis. And thanks to the debris and stranded cars spewed across the landscape, the ultimate game-changing cars was deployed. The safety car was brought out. Bernd Mailander was sent out to gather up all the cars to allow for a safe recovery of Magnussen's anarchy. Until they passed the first sector and all the cars had been gathered up, no driver was going to be allowed past. But the source of contention wasn't in who was in that gaggle of cars, it was who wasn't. Despite Norris being the leader of the race, the safety car didn't pick him up. He had beaten the safety car to the control line by 20 meters. Instead, it was Max that was at the head of the train. Lando had gone on ahead, albeit according to the speed delta. What this meant was that when he was brought in for his pit stop, the gap between Lando and Max had ballooned from around about 11 seconds to 33. He emerged from the pits in the lead, still ahead of the safety car, while David Croft began melting in the commentary box. The significance of all of this has been heavily debated, and a few of the drivers took exception to this interesting timing of deployment. Now, yeah, in safety car conditions, you only lose 9 seconds in a pit stop, and Lando was 11 seconds ahead of Max, yes, but a cynic would argue that that safety car really should have picked him up then and there, and that if it had, it would have likely destroyed any advantage that Lando would have had. The consequences of the safety car has left people with a sour taste in their mouths, but irrespective of what anyone's opinions are as to whether he would have emerged ahead or not, with or without the safety car, car. Right here, on lap 32, in reality, Lando was in the lead, about to restart the race. With 15 laps to go, Lando just had to hold off the 3-time defending world champion who had ice in his veins and was in a car that was almost as good as he was. What pressure could this possibly equal? Maybe having Hamilton there? Like Sochi 2021? And how did that work out for him? That's what the doubters were saying. In fact, even the supporters of him were shaking at this point. Even if the McLaren could hold its own, could Lando hold his own? The race got underway again, and it seemed like only a matter of time before the inevitable happens. But as the laps counted down, one by one, it became evident that rather than Max siding past and running away, it was Lando instead that was running away. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4... It just kept going, eventually morphing into a 7-second gap. It wasn't a dramatic run to the line, it just sort of happened. About as uneventful as a day in Belgium, and doubts did linger for sure. It was all just a matter of getting to the line. Well, Lad did it. That elusive first win was finally there. For the fans and the British press, the second coming had arrived. And we could talk about the safety car forever. And Jesus, even from the very first F1 race that it was introduced, it was always causing these kinds of problems. But as it is, and as much of a cop-out this may sound, that is the nature of the game. It wasn't the first time, and it won't be the last either. And as cringe as it is to see the Union Jack media impressing upon people to focus on Lando's last stint and not the rest of it, there is a lot of truth to that. This wasn't just some random pace that came from nowhere. This was delivering on the promise from Friday. Luck did play a big hand in this win, but it was equally shared by his pace throughout the Grand Prix. Despite the rubbish start, of course. Max gave his congrats to Lando after the race, and despite the understandable disappointment of losing out on a race, did make the comment that you win some, you lose some, and that's just part of it. Lando and McLaren did celebrate that win, absolutely. I mean, who wouldn't? Commemorating the win with this merch, taking the piss out of the Lando no wins meme, which, to be honest, kind of reeks of insecurity, but who am I to judge? And irrespective of what comes from this day forth, the demons of Sochi 2021 have been buried. There was no wondering about whether he had the capabilities to win a Formula 1 race. It was about whether that day would ever come at all. And in Miami, for Lando, it did. It finally did.